My name is Grant Hillary Brenner. I'm a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and I'm a clinical assistant professor at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai and co-founder of a few different groups, including Neurocomprehensive Wellness Management, the Mental Health Media Group, and sister nonprofit Create M, and Brighter Neurotherapeutics, an interventional psychiatry group.
Can you tell me about your own mental health journey?
Yeah, that's the main event in a way. So very strangely, as a kid, from an early age, I think even before I was a teenager, I wanted to be a psychoanalyst and a scientist. That's like what, when they ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? First, I said scientist, and then I said psychoanalyst. And I think the reasons for that there's a few of them. One is kind of just, I think, who I am, intellectually curious, always very interested in psychology and sociology, in philosophy, in information processing. I am the youngest of a bunch of kids, and I would by several years, and I used to read their science books. I'm not sure how much I understood, and I just always had a great sense of natural curiosity. And I grew up in a part of New Jersey where psychoanalysis was very much in the air in the early 70s. And people in my family actually saw a psychiatrist named a psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, I think, named Dr. Bine, who was a refugee from World War II, as a lot of psychoanalysts came to the United States fleeing the Holocaust. And so I grew up in this very Philip Roth kind of informed part of New Jersey with a lot of psychoanalysis. So it was very much in the air. My mom was ill and dying. She died when I was 9. And I remember, part of going to Dr. Bine was, I think, because the family was dealing with that, though I don't remember it well enough to know if that was an explicit reason. I also had a childhood illness called Legg-Calvé-Perthes disease, also known as avascular necrosis. And that's a condition that usually affects boys around the age of 7, and it involves the hip kind of dislocating because the blood supply to the head of the femur is cut off and the bone necroses. And so I had this experience where one Saturday morning I woke up and my hip just gave out. It was incredibly painful. And so I think that really, opened my eyes. I have a sibling who's developmentally disabled. And so I saw all of these things going on. I also think going to Hebrew school and learning about trauma and the need to kind of do something to prevent trauma, it all kind of fed together, all these different things, my temperament and my life experiences. And what I was exposed to when I went to the bookstore, I remember at a young age, I went to the Livingston Mall, which I was born in Livingston, New Jersey, and I picked up a couple of books. And I remember reading a lot of Alan Watts, like a lot of Taoism, but I also read about Freud and Jung. And my stepmother was very intellectually influential, and she would give me books to read that were more like consciousness philosophy. So books like Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel, Escher, Bach. I read about this kind of high level, kind of complexity theory, mathy consciousness stuff, and I loved it. And another thing that comes to mind kind of anecdotally is my mom had a book on acupressure, like massage and acupuncture. And I remember reading that. And I was a kid who, on the playground, when kids like sprain their ankle, I would try to use acupuncture. And that just continued throughout my teenage years. I read a lot about meditation and hypnosis. And so I think it was a natural fit for me. I did take like a meandering course though. So although I was like thinking about being a physician in high school, kind of suburban, upper middle class standard, I was a member of the Young Physicians, Future Physicians Club in high school. I was also very curious. I traveled around the world. I was lucky to be able to do that as a teenager and traveled abroad. So I really got a broad sense of the kind of human condition. Um, and so when I went to college, I really kind of forgot about all that. I did my pre-med requirements, but I wasn't like a pre-med kind of cutthroat. That wasn't the main thing. The main thing I studied was physics and computer science. And then I kind of detoured away from that. I realized that I wasn't going to be a theoretical physicist. I didn't think I had quite what it would take to do that. Um, and so I went into psychology, and then at the end of college, I applied to med school, and I really thought about psychiatry. I was deterred though from doing it because I was told that as a psychiatrist you couldn't do therapy. This was the mid to late '90s, and I went into what I really liked a lot as well was surgery, and I did 2 years of general surgery. But at some point in that experience of working 110, 120-hour weeks, I realized I could do whatever I wanted. I mean, it was life and death all the time. And so I switched to psychiatry. And then after psychiatry residency at Mount Sinai, I went on to do psychoanalytic training at a place called the William Allenson White Institute, which is an interpersonal relational model of psychoanalysis, not the classical kind of Freudian model, which really rubbed me the wrong way. It's a two-person model. It's a more dynamic, active style. And there's lots more after that, but that really set me on this path.
When you're working with people, what is it like for you to be helping people on their own journey?
Um, I find it very rewarding. I really like helping people. I have, a very active style. I try lots of different things, even though I'm psychoanalytically trained. I have no problem with structured therapy approaches. Really very patient centered, and in that way, probably like um, an existential humanistic model. But also very pragmatic, like whatever works. I think I got a lot of that out of surgery. It's like I don't have a particular allegiance. And so when I work with people, I try to figure out like whatever's going to help them get to where they need and want to go. Those aren't always the same things, of course. And I really like doing it. I mean, I wanted to be a therapist, and I'd say maybe half of my working hours or a third of my working hours, if you actually count how much I actually work outside of the usual hours, is doing psychotherapy. And I just love doing that. I love understanding people. It goes back to that curiosity about the world, because every person is their own world, and that's really important to understand, and then kind of figuring out like what's going to help them. And I tend to work with people who are really stuck, not so much people who could get short-term therapy and just do it, but usually people who need deeper work and longer term work when other things have failed. So I love doing that part of it. I often have kind of a coaching quality to what I do. I don't have a problem with that. Though I think it's important not to be overly directive and let people figure stuff out too. And then the other thing I got into in 2010, I think going back to my surgical roots, is transcranial magnetic stimulation. And that is a treatment that was initially approved for depression that stimulates the frontal cortex and strengthens these central executive networks. And over the last 15 years, we now have protocols that are much more effective. And so that's really been particularly amazing for me in the last few years, because I have this way where I can really understand people's subjective reality. And then with the type of imaging we have and understanding of neuroscience, we're starting to really understand how that subjective and that objective reality match and overlap. And so I've treated patients who are able to make a lot of progress in therapy, even after being stuck for 10 or 20 years. I think not just because TMS may treat their depression, but because it increases their neuroplasticity, their flexibility, and it allows them to resume development that has been interrupted. So it increases their capacity to engage in their own developmental work. Or there was an analyst named Wilfred Bion who called it the psychoanalytic function of the personality, kind of being a good steward for oneself. So that's been incredibly gratifying to be able to both be involved in the therapy piece, but then also see what happens when you can change the person's brain networks. And nowadays we can get an MRI, even a functional MRI, and have it analyzed and start to do very much like what's called precision interventional psychiatry. And that's really amazing because I've always loved the neuroscience. And now we actually have tools in psychiatry that we can understand and make positive changes for people.
And when you are introducing yourself, you have a lot of titles. You're working on a lot of stuff. So how does that all merge well together?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. Um, Whenever I try to work with someone like on branding, my brand, I'm sure if you're an expert in branding, you kind of look at my brand and you kind of go, I don't know what this brand is. I think I'm in this sense like I'm who I am. And I don't try too hard to look for a coherence other than I have a real goal to make the world a better place. I think there is a lot of low-hanging fruit, and I think the way people see things and think about things really gets in the way, but I think if we could change the way we think a little differently, the world could be so much better for so many people. So I think I have this kind of pragmatic idealism that is behind everything I do. So whether it's my private practice or whether it's TMS or whether it's doing disaster mental health work, which I've been doing for years, I didn't mention, but I both run deployments and when I was a bit younger would go to places or work in refugee camps or go overseas to disaster zones. I just have a real desire to help people. And I like doing a lot of different things. I think because I'm very curious, I really kind of almost want to cover as much as I can. And that's just what's gratifying for me. I'd say a common thread there is also learning, just a joy of learning. That's always been a saving grace for me. And I want other people to learn too. I feel like it's a kind of a like we win if we do this together. Then the world gets to be a better place.
Can you talk a little bit more about disaster mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people want to learn more about it, I co-edited the second edition of a book called Disaster Psychiatry, Readiness, Evaluation, and Treatment. Disaster mental health is been kind of a funny thing because although it seems like such an obvious thing, for many, many, many years, it really didn't get much attention, and it still doesn't get a lot of attention. You might think that it would, and by attention, I mean funding, among other things. And so it goes to that kind of wisdom idea, right? Like we know these things are going to happen. People knew that New Orleans was going to flood. They knew that the levees weren't right. The politics had been interfering with building it. It was related to lower socioeconomic areas. So there's this high level kind of policymaker piece to it where it's like, well, how do you get people to think about investing in prevention, right? In medicine, the most effective thing is prevention. It's easier to prevent most illnesses than it is to treat them afterward, and it's less expensive ultimately as well. But actually doing disaster work, um, going and working in shelters, for example, in Louisiana, or working in the Afghan refugee camp after they were evacuated a few years ago, or consulting in India after the shootings in Mumbai, or any one of a number of other activities we've done, and helping to train people and deploy them. It's fascinating work. It gets you out of the office and we're not doing like psychotherapy typically. You don't do that in a disaster. You do psychological first aid. There's not a lot of evidence, there's not a lot of research on it, but there's some best practices and principles that we follow. And so I mean, for me, that fits with a kind of global health focus. Some people who do disaster mental health kind of slide into global health. A lot of my colleagues have. And so I feel like I'm contributing, and actually doing the work is really can be quite fascinating, as you could imagine. And people who do work like that, humanitarian work and disaster work, it's um, it's kind of an altered, not an altered state of consciousness, but it's a different reality that you're in, right? The post-disaster reality is very different. We've all lived through it a little bit now with the pandemic, which I think has raised awareness. Or if you live in an area that's been stricken by a disaster, but it's like trauma too. I'm very much a traumatologist because of my background and interests. And I think if people haven't actually lived through something like that, they really don't understand what it's like. And not everyone can live in that type of environment. It's often rough, physically living in barracks, or not having access to things. But you're out there. But you're out there on the edge of human experience in a way that's usually safe. So I generally like doing safe things. So you're not going to find me climbing mountains. I was a little bit more rambunctious when I was younger. But it's a way to really get to the extremes of human experiences without putting your own life at risk, which again, I'm not super fond of doing. And I find I like being useful. So maybe that's not always a good thing. But again, that's what I find most gratifying.
And as a author and a writer, what is it like getting your thoughts, ideas, knowledge, feelings, everything out on the page?
I find it's really helpful. It clarifies what I'm thinking about. Quite often, when I write something, then it makes a different kind of sense to me. It's pulling together all these different threads into a coherent story. So I've done a lot of blogging and writing, and I find that that's really helpful. And it also serves that function of kind of public service. So I've written relatively few academic papers. I find the whole academic thing really problematic. Honestly, it's often a bit abusive the way academics work. And trying to get the word out, getting something published, it's incredibly difficult. There's just a lot of barriers. And you can have a lot of impact if you do research and academic writing. It can have a trickle down effect, but a lot of times it's just kind of the industry of academia. And there's so many academic papers written, and like no one reads them, hardly anyone reads them. And so I really find it gratifying to take people's research and translate it into something that the public can understand and use. I feel like I'm doing my part in that regard.
And also, I've found fascinating is I was in broadcasting for 20 years, so I love the power of video and media to get messages out. And you do the same thing. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am probably behind the curve in terms of making my own video content. I podcast. I like speaking. It's not like the radio. I haven't been good about making short videos. It's always on my to-do list. Like right now I have for my media person, I have a set of videos that I'm supposed to make about TMS. I'll get around to it. I guess I'm a little camera shy, but what I found is that the arts and media are incredibly powerful ways to share experiences that everyone can understand. And it goes back to my roots growing up as well. My mom was very much involved in philanthropic work. What was I going to say? Philanthropic, which is not a word, but I don't know what it would mean if it were. And she would organize art shows for charities. And I spent a fair amount of time as a kid kind of just sitting there, I guess watching her work. I have very few memories of her directly, actually, but I remember kind of being at these art shows and absorbing the vibe. When I was a psychiatry resident, we organized an art show for the work of the psychiatry residents, and the hospital was nice enough to let us have an art show in the main entry at Mount Sinai. And a few years ago, I got involved in planning a film festival on mental health. Someone approached me, um, and what that grew into is now a platform called the Mental Health Media Group. And so it's a way of teaching, I'd say. It's one thing to make your own content, but being able to share, for example, films that people have made about their own experience. Some of them are first person about what they have lived through. Some of them are more documentary about things like suicide crisis among urban youth, with interviews of parents who've lost kids to suicide from less privileged backgrounds. It helps to raise awareness. One of the videos we showed is a music video called Shady Little Lady, which is amazing. And it was done by these two young women about hair pulling, trichotillomania. But they show the family, and in the family, the father, and it's kind of comical, but it's kind of serious. It's got a Tim Burton kind of style. It's beautiful. Check it out, Shady Little Lady. And there's a little figure like this kind of gothy looking figure that whispers in the ear of the girl who's the main character, and they're sitting around the table and the dad is taking a drink off a flask or a fifth, and it really brings home experientially what people actually live through. And when you watch films like that, you know it in a very different way. And I grew up consuming a lot of media. I was a classic kind of latchkey kid in the 80s. And so I was kind of raised by the TV and movies and movie videos. And I think it's very much attuned with where the culture is with this type of content. And what I've seen is that even very experienced clinicians who see these types of movies and videos, they understand their patients in a way that they didn't from working. And I had that experience myself. It's just a much more kind of direct transmission of experiential understanding to watch a movie like that, a well-made movie. And then the craft of it is interesting to me. I'm a photographer. That's my current creative outlet. I've been a painter. I like photography. I like painting, but photography is more accessible in some ways right now. So I really also appreciate the craft of it, and I admire people who can make well-made videos. And the better made it is, like a well-written story, the better the person who is reading the story or watching the movie understands something on a very deep level that they just wouldn't get. It's almost as if they had lived the experience themselves. Not quite, but it's the closest thing in a way. And that's why I love it. And plus I love giving people a community and a voice. So when we've had film festivals and then we have a gala event afterward to give out the awards, the people talk with each other. And these are people who have felt marginalized and stigmatized, and creating a space where filmmakers who are interested in suffering and mental health and transcendence and post-traumatic growth and recovery is just incredibly rewarding. It's a little bit like the experience of doing therapy, but with a whole group of people. And we'd love to keep growing that so that it becomes really a much wider platform. And if you look at it, there's a lot of creators who are doing work in this area, but they're pretty fragmented. They work here, they work there. And so this idea of raising public awareness means really creating a broad and well-known platform for it.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
I sleep a lot, and I eat well, and I exercise regularly, and I spend time with my family, though we have teenagers, so they don't want to spend time with us as much. I practice self-compassion and do other forms of meditation that I found very helpful. Being creative, I think, is incredibly helpful. And I'm not I'm not one of those people who like has the day scheduled down to the minute. So I spend a fair amount of time every day letting my mind wander and kind of just doing whatever I want. A lot of times that's taking a walk. I live in New York City. I walk a lot with my camera. I find that that's really great. You get exercise, you get creativity. I do like to kind of combine things for sort of efficiency. I like the idea of layering things so that you get multiple benefits. When I can, I like to get out into nature. I find that's really good for my mental health. And I've done a lot of work. I haven't been in therapy in a while, but in analytic training, I did a lot of psychoanalytic work. I've worked with some coaches. I've worked with body workers and yoga teachers. I've studied martial arts that are more what they call internal martial arts. And a lot of these things I think go to the mind body connection. And so I've really tried hard to create an integrated approach to my own health that isn't divorced from the physical reality. So I like to stay very grounded, kind of in the world, and very much, like they say, kind of in the present. Though I think that gets kind of misconstrued a lot because being in the present often means ignoring a lot of stuff, and that's not what I mean. I think being in the present means really expanding your consciousness and attention and paying attention to a lot of things and putting it together. So I think that all kind of goes to mental health. I'm trying to think if I left anything out. I think being playful is one of the biggest things. It goes with creativity, but a lot of adults kind of lose that capacity for play. And play and humor for me are sometimes to a fault a part of everything I do. It doesn't always work well in corporate settings, for example. Like when you have a 25-minute meeting, they don't want anything that's off track. And I worry, is a bit of a digression, but I worry about that mentality a little bit. This kind of like work and forget how to play. I think it's bad for our culture, and I think it's bad for the planet.
Yeah, I agree. I can't take if I take things too seriously, I get super depressed. So you need to have some sort of outlet.
Yeah, I mean, play is it's really good for the brain. And a lot of people, they get stuck in this way of living, and I've seen it in my private practice, and you read about it. Their lives kind of proceed along this track, which is kind of dead end or devitalized. And having seen my mother die, like, I think I was very much aligned toward, like, you need to be alive. You really need to be living. And so I feel bad for people who get stuck in this kind of mechanistic existence. And what often happens is they hit rock bottom, right? Their personal relationships fall apart, or they realize that the way they're acting with their kids is really destructive. And a lot of times they've been doing it so long that once they realize that they need to start making changes, they really get anxious and they feel lost because they don't know where to start. And so I also like working with people who are starting to realize that they want and need something a little more, but have been so kind of conditioned to be conforming that they need someone who kind of speaks both languages. So having been an entrepreneur, having worked in corporate settings, having done general surgery where it's almost military or corporate, I can speak both languages. So I can kind of meet people where they are. I can do kind of the bro thing, and then I can also be like this kind of shrink who is interested in these kind of not very productive things. And I that kind of tickles me too.
So how can people reach out and learn more about you?
So I'm on social media. So I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram primarily. Grant H. Brenner MD is usually my handle. My website is similar. It's www.granthbrennermd.com. The TMS practice is brighterneurotheraputics.com. Um, and mental health media group is mentalhealthmediagroup.com. Our podcast is the Doorknob Comments podcast, doorknobcomments.com. And my blog on Psychology Today is called Experimentations with a capital M, experimentations. Ha ha ha.